When I got married, my mother-in-law had sneered, "I just don't understand why you're still working." Her disdain was unmistakable. A woman's place is at home with her children. Gary, my husband, never once stood up for me. He'd brush off their cruel comments, telling me to ignore them, but their words were like relentless needles, slowly eroding my confidence. With my own mother gone and my marriage deteriorating, my resentment toward Gary grew. He had never truly been there for me, leaving me alone to bear the weight of his family's criticism. I remember being pregnant with Amanda and hearing his parents' thinly veiled disappointment when she was born. "Next time, make sure it's a boy," they said, hardly bothering to mask their dissatisfaction. It hurt deeply to watch my daughter face such blatant favoritism. Now, Gary wanted to use my inheritance to move us closer to his parents, pulling us even further into their toxic world. The idea was infuriating, and I knew I wouldn't let that happen. Sitting alone in the quiet, surrounded by my mother's things, I started forming a plan. I would no longer be a passive observer in my own life. I would fight back, not just for myself, but for my children. Over the next few days, I gathered every document I could find, preparing for the legal battle ahead. My lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Ms. Kathleen, reassured me. "We have a strong case, Denise," she said confidently. The battle lines were drawn. For the sake of my dignity and my children's future, I would stand my ground. Then one evening, while sorting through my mother's belongings, I discovered an old, dusty envelope tucked away in a drawer. Inside was a treasure trove of stock certificates and property deeds, revealing the fortune she had quietly amassed. My hands shook as I grasped the magnitude of her hidden wealth. More than $6 million in assets. I could hardly believe it. She had lived so modestly, but this showed the depth of her sacrifice and foresight. There was a note in her careful handwriting. "Denise, I saved this for a rainy day. I hope it gives you and the kids a better life. Use it wisely." Tears filled my eyes as I felt her love and protection, like a comforting embrace from beyond. The next day, determined to confront Gary, I found him in the living room, flipping idly through a magazine. "Gary, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He glanced up, irritation flickering in his eyes. "What is it now, Denise?" This time, I was ready. This time, I wouldn't back down. I held up the envelope, feeling a mix of shock and gratitude as I explained, "I found something my mother left behind. Turns out, she left me stocks and properties worth $6 million. Gary's eyes widened, a flash of greed and shock evident on his face. $6 million? That's incredible," he exclaimed, his tone unnervingly eager. I met his gaze, resolute. "Don't get any ideas, Gary. This money is mine," I said firmly, disgusted by his reaction. This inheritance was a testament to my mother's love and foresight, a gift intended to provide a better life for me and our children. "You won't see a cent of it," I added, watching as his expression darkened. "You can't just keep it all to yourself, Denise. We're married. What's yours is mine," he snapped, his frustration evident. Anger surged within me. "Is that all you care about, Gary? You don't see me or the kids. You only see dollar signs," I accused, realizing how much he had changed. Gary abruptly stood, his face red with fury. "You're being selfish, Denise. I'm thinking about our family's future," he argued. "What family, Gary? The one you're willing to sell off for your own gain?" I shot back. He took a step toward me, fists clenched. "You'll regret this, Denise. I'll make sure of it," he threatened. But I didn't flinch. "Bring it on, Gary. I'm not afraid of you anymore." With that, he stormed out, leaving me to collect my thoughts. I knew this was only the beginning of a bitter struggle, but I was ready to fight for my children, for my mother's legacy, and for myself. The following week was a blur of legal consultations and tense silences at home. Gary's shock had turned to a cold, calculated aggression, like a caged animal, desperate and dangerous. Then one evening, after the kids were asleep, he cornered me in the kitchen, his gaze wild and menacing. "You think you're clever, Denise? Hiding that money from me?" he sneered. My heart pounded, but I held my ground. "It's not about being clever, Gary. It's about doing what's right. That money is for me and the kids, not for your selfish fantasies." "I'm your husband. I have a right to that money," Gary snarled, slamming his fists on the countertop, making me flinch. His words dripped with venom, but I wasn't about to back down. "A right to what, Gary? To a woman who won't be bullied into giving you everything?" I shot back, meeting his furious glare. His face contorted with anger. "You'll regret this, Denise. I'll make sure you don't get a dime of that money. He spat, his voice thick with menace. But despite the fear his threats stirred, my resolve only hardened. I was determined to protect what my mother had entrusted to me. Is that a threat? I demanded, standing firm as he leaned in close, his breath reeking of bitterness. It's a promise, he hissed. I stepped past him, my heart pounding, but my resolve like steel. We'll see about that. The court will decide, I said, striding away as his venomous words echoed behind me. You're going to end up with nothing, Denise. Nothing. The following day, I received a call from my lawyer. Denise, Gary has filed for divorce. He's claiming half of your inheritance, she informed me. Taking a steadying breath, I replied, let him try. I'll fight him every step of the way. Miss Kathleen's voice was firm with reassurance. Don't worry, Denise, she said. We have a strong case. Justice will be served. That night, as I lay in bed, my thoughts turned to my children, sleeping peacefully in their rooms. This battle wasn't just for me, it was for their future. Gary had become a stranger, consumed by greed and resentment, but I was no longer the woman he thought he could intimidate. As I drifted towards sleep, I pictured the courtroom, the judge, and myself standing tall, not just for the inheritance, but for my dignity, my children's future, and the quiet strength my mother had instilled in me. The legal fight was brutal. Gary's tactic was obvious, to paint me as an uncooperative wife hoarding the family's resources. But his arguments were flimsy, rooted in desperation rather than substance. During a mediation session, in a last attempt to reach a settlement before trial, Gary sat across from me, his lawyer by his side. His gaze was cold, his demeanor bordering on arrogant. Let's be reasonable, Denise, his lawyer began smoothly. Gary is entitled to a portion of this inheritance. It's only fair. I glanced at Miss Kathleen, my resolve unwavering. Fair, I replied, my tone firm. Gary has contributed nothing to this inheritance. It was left to me by my late mother, intended solely for me and our children. Gary's claim to my inheritance wasn't just a legal fight, it was a moral one. My mother had worked tirelessly to save this, not for Gary's whims but for the future and security of her grandchildren. This inheritance wasn't just money, it was her legacy. I was prepared to defend it with everything I had. Gary leaned forward, his tone dripping with scorn. Come on, Denise, you're just being spiteful. Don't you think the kids would want their father to have a share? A surge of anger flared within me. This isn't about spite, Gary. It's about justice, I shot back, my voice sharp. You've never once considered what the kids truly need? This is about your greed. His lawyer began to interrupt, but Gary waved him off. You think you can take everything, don't you, Denise? Play the grieving daughter and the victimized wife. I met his glare, my voice calm but resolute. This isn't a game, Gary. You're the one trying to take what isn't yours. The mediator, a stern-faced woman, raised her hands in an attempt to bring order. Let's keep this civil. We're here to find a resolution. Gary cut her off, his voice rising. Resolution? She's the one being unreasonable. The tension in the room was thick and suffocating, but I kept my tone steady. I am being reasonable, Gary. I'm protecting what my mother intended for her grandchildren. Your claims are baseless. See, we were at an impasse. The mediator called for a break. As we stood, Gary leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. You'll pay for this, Denise. I'll make sure of it. I walked out of the room, heart pounding, but my resolve solid. His threats were empty, his case weak, and I knew the law was on my side. I was determined to see this fight through to the end. In the weeks that followed, I immersed myself in legal preparation. Miss Kathleen and I went over every detail, every document, ensuring I was ready for what lay ahead. The children stayed with my sister, shielded from the turmoil. I missed them dearly, but I knew this battle was as much for their future as it was for mine. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. Standing in the courtroom, I felt a surge of strength, prepared to defend my mother's legacy. I braced myself, prepared to face Gary and dismantle whatever twisted story he intended to tell. This was the moment of truth, and I was ready to defend my mother's legacy and secure my children's future. I steeled myself, channeling every ounce of strength into the fight ahead. The courtroom became a battleground where words served as weapons. Gary's attorney painted him as a wronged husband unjustly denied his share. But under Miss Kathleen's skillful cross-examination, his arguments crumbled like a fragile house of cards. During a recess, Gary confronted me in the hallway, fury twisting his face. You're ruining everything, Denise. he snarled. Do you really think you're going to walk away with all that money? Despite the fear clawing at my insides, I held my ground. It's not your money, Gary. It never was. He stepped closer, his voice a venomous whisper. I'll drive this out as long as it takes. I'll bleed you dry with legal fees. I met his gaze, steady and unwavering. Do what you must. I won't let you bully me into submission. As we returned to the courtroom, I felt a surge of empowerment. Gary's threats seemed hollow, his bravado masking desperation. The final verdict brought vindication. The judge ruled in my favor, recognizing the inheritance as solely mine. Gary's expression of defeat was unmistakable. While I'd won the legal battle, it came at the cost of my marriage. The family I once knew had shattered. In the weeks that followed, Gary's life unraveled. His reputation, once built on intimidation, crumbled as people saw him for the greedy man he truly was. Word of his downfall soon reached me. He'd lost his job, his friends distanced themselves, and his standing in the community was in tatters. His fall from grace was sharp, and though I couldn't feel pleased, there was an undeniable sense of poetic justice. One evening, a phone call interrupted my thoughts. It was a mutual friend. Denise, have you heard the latest about Gary? I paused. No, what happened? He's leaving town. He lost his job and his house. He's pretty much destitute. A complex emotion stirred within me, not quite satisfaction, but something close. Gary had sown seeds of destruction in his pursuit against me, but ultimately he was the one who unraveled. After hanging up, I gazed at a picture of my children on the mantel. This fight had been for them, for their future and security. That night, as I tucked them into bed, a deep sense of peace washed over me. The battle was over, and we had come out stronger, free from Gary's shadow, and ready for a new chapter. Life would be different, but we were together, and that was all that mattered. In the months following the court ruling, life found a new rhythm. The victory brought closure, yet it marked the beginning of a new journey of healing and rebuilding. I decided to sell our old house, which held too many bitter memories. Each item I packed was a step further from my past with Gary. I was committed to building a better future for Amanda and Andrew. One day, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, I found a photo of Gary and me during happier times. For a moment, I allowed myself to grieve for the life I thought we had, for the love I once believed was real. But as I looked at his face in the photo, I realized that the man I had married no longer existed. He had shown his true colors, dark and unpleasant. With a decisive motion, I tossed the photo into the trash, a symbolic act of letting go. Moving to a new town brought us a fresh start. I found a cozy home in a welcoming neighborhood, and the kids quickly made friends at their new school. I immersed myself in my writing, finding solace in the worlds I created. One evening, as I was tucking Amanda into bed, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes and asked, "Mom, do you miss Dad?" The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes I miss who I thought your dad was," I said softly, "but we're better off now." It was true. Despite everything, we had found a way to move forward, stronger and more united. "We're a strong team, just the three of us," I added, and she nodded with a maturity beyond her years. "I like it here, Mom. I like our new home," she said, her words warming my heart. We had come a long way. As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts turned to Gary's downfall. His greed and malice had backfired, leaving him with nothing. While I took no joy in his misfortune, there was a sense of justice in the outcome. The road ahead for the kids and me would be long, but we were finally on a path to healing. With the inheritance securely invested, I knew it would provide for their education and their future needs. I closed my eyes, thinking of my mother. Her strength and foresight had been our salvation. In her wisdom, she had given me the means to protect myself and my children. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a profound peace. The storm that had once threatened to uproot our lives had passed, leaving clarity and hope in its wake. We had weathered the worst, and now, with a new day dawning, it felt like anything was possible.